Finally, the day I wanted so much arrived. The day before, I wrote these few lines to my father. Dear Papa, today is the vigil of my first Holy Communion, a day of great joy for me. I write these lines to assure you of my affection, and to beg you to pray to Jesus that the first time he comes to me, he may find me disposed to receive all those graces that he has prepared for me. I beg your pardon for all the displeasures and all the disobedience that I have been guilty of, and I beg you this evening to forget all these things. Asking your blessing, I am your affectionate daughter, Gemma. I prepared myself with much work on the part of those good nuns for my general confession. I made it in 3 sessions to Monsignor Volpi. I finished it on Saturday, the vigil of that happy day. Finally, Sunday morning came. I arose early and ran to Jesus for the first time. At last, my desires were realized. I understood for the first time the promise of Jesus, "He who eats of me shall live of my life." Dear Father, I do not know how to tell what passed between Jesus and me at that moment. Jesus made himself felt very strongly by my poor soul. I understood at that moment that the delights of heaven are not like those of the earth. I felt myself overcome by the desire to render that union with my God continual. I felt weary of the world more and more disposed to recollection. It was that same morning that Jesus gave me the great desire to be a religious. Before leaving the convent, I made certain resolutions regarding the conduct of my life. I will receive confession and communion each time as though it were my last. I will visit Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament often, especially when I am afflicted. I will prepare myself for every feast of our Blessed Mother by some mortification, and every evening I will ask my Heavenly Mother's blessing. I want to remain always in the presence of God. Every time the clock strikes, I will repeat 3 times, "My Jesus, mercy." I would have liked to add other resolutions to these, but my teacher would not permit it. And she had good reason, for within a year after I returned to my family, I had forgotten these resolutions as well as the good advice I had received, and I became worse than before. I continued to go to school to the nuns, and they were fairly satisfied with me. Jesus made himself felt ever stronger. Several times he made me feel very great consolation, but as soon as I left him, I began to be proud, more disobedient than before, a bad example to my companions and a scandal to all. At school, not a day passed on which I was not punished. I did not know my lessons, and I was almost expelled. At home, I would not let anyone have peace. Every day, I wanted to go for a walk, always wearing new clothes which my poor father provided me for a long time. I ceased to say my usual prayers morning and evening. But while I was committing all these sins, I never forgot to recite every day 3 Hail Marys with my hands under my knees, a practice my mother had taught me that Jesus might protect me every day from sins against holy purity. During this time, which lasted almost an entire year, the only thing I had left was charity to the poor. Every time I left the house, I asked my father for money. If he sometimes refused it, I would take bread, flour, or some such thing. And God himself would see to it that I met some poor people, for every time I left the house there would be 3 or 4. To those who came to the door, I would give clothes or whatever else I had. But then my confessor forbade me to do these things, and I stopped doing them. In this way, Jesus worked in me a new conversion. For my father no longer gave me money. I could take nothing from the house, and every time I went out, I met none but poor people, and they all ran after me. I could not give them anything. This pained me so that I wept continually. For this reason, I quit going out except when I really had to. The result was that I grew tired of clothes and everything else. I wanted to make another general confession, but I was not permitted to do so. I did confess everything, however, and Jesus gave me such a deep sorrow for my sins that I felt it always. I asked pardon of my teachers, because I had displeased them most of all. But this change did not please my father and my brothers. One brother especially chided me because I wanted to go to Mass every morning, but from then on Jesus helped me more than ever. At this time, as my grandfather and uncle were dead, 2 of my aunts, my father's sisters, came to live with us. They were good, religious, and affectionate, but their affection was never the tender love of a mother. They took us to church every day, and they were diligent in instructing us in the religion. Among us brothers and sisters, some were better and some worse. The oldest boy, the fourth of our family to die, and the youngest girl, Julia, were the best, and so were more loved by my aunts, but the others, who took my bad example, were far more lively and so less appreciated. Nonetheless, none of us lacked what was needed. I was always the worst of all, and who knows what a strict account I must give to the Lord for the bad example that I gave to my brothers and companions. My aunts never failed to correct me in all my failings, but I responded arrogantly, giving them many short answers. Now, as I have said, Jesus used my prohibition to give alms as means to convert me. I began to think of how much my sins offended Jesus. I began also to study and work harder, and my teachers continued to encourage me. The one defect for which I was often reproved and punished was my pride. My teacher frequently called me pride personified. Yes, this was my greatest sin, but only Jesus knows whether I realized it or not. Many a time I fell on my knees before my teacher and all the class, and even the Mother Superior, to beg pardon for this sin. And also, many a time in the evening I wept when I was alone. I was not aware of this sin, and every day I fell into it time and again without adverting to it. The teacher who at the time of my retreat had explained the passion to me reproved me one day and explained the matter to me, perhaps because she had noticed a change in me. But she did so little by little. She often said to me, "Gemma, you belong to Jesus and you should be all his. Be good. Jesus is pleased with you, and you need much help." That good teacher had detected my desire. At other times she said to me, "Gemma, what graces Jesus has given you." I, who never understood all this, remained as one dumb, but sometimes I felt the need of a little talk, and I don't hesitate to say it, of a caress from my dear teacher, so I ran looking for her. Sometimes she would appear very serious, and when I saw her like that, I would cry. Then she would take me into her arms, even though I was 11 years old, and caress me. As a result, I was so attached to her that I called her my mother. Every 2 years, the nuns used to have a retreat, which was open also to the external students. It hardly seemed true that I could commune so intimately with Jesus again. But this time I was all alone without any help, for the nuns were making their own retreat at the same time as the children. I understood well that Jesus was giving me this opportunity to know myself better and to purify myself and please him more. I recall the words which that good priest repeated so often: "Let us remember that we are nothing and that God is all. God is our creator, and all that we have, he has given us." I remember that after a few days of the retreat, the preacher had us make a meditation on sin. It was then that I came to realize, dear Father, that I was worthy only to be despised by all. I saw myself to be so ungrateful to God, guilty as I was of so many sins. Then we made a meditation on hell, of which I knew myself to be deserving, and during this meditation I made this resolution: I will make acts of contrition during the day, especially when I have committed some fault. During the last days of the retreat, we considered the example of humility, meekness, obedience, and patience of Jesus. And from this meditation, I formed 2 more resolutions: to make a visit to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament every day, and speak to him more with the heart than with the tongue. I will try harder to avoid speaking of indifferent things, and to speak rather of heavenly things. At the end of the retreat, I obtained permission from my confessor to receive communion 3 times a week, and likewise to go to confession 3 times a week, and I continued to do this for 3 or 4 years until 1895.